Hello everybody, this is Blex here bringing you a brand new Starcraft 2 video. This time I'll be covering a full match replay that I use. So I recently posted a basic build guide for Terran and I got some requests to go through the full match and talk about how I'd progress from that basic build. If you want to know more about the intricacies of the opening of the build, which I think is so important and doesn't get covered enough, I do have a video that I'll link here that you guys are able to follow through. But the basic build that I feature in that is what I feature and use here to win this match. So it starts off with the typical supply depot first by routing my first SCV out to the opening of my base, and then I drop a barracks right after that. Now with that, after that first barracks, I drop a refinery right away. I do make a mistake here and accidentally route 2 SCVs outside. It's okay, it's not the end of the world. We can roll with the punches and continue to move forward in this game. Now, after that first refinery, we want to route 2 SCVs to it right away. And this first barracks, we want to route the first unit to the enemy base. And we want to route our SCV to the natural, as it will be fast expanding. Now, our opponent sends out a very early SCV scout. Luckily, they're not too tricky with it. Sometimes an early SCV scout will come and harass your barracks worker or your natural expansion. They get a few pokes at me, but that's about it. From here, we want to make sure we build our command center right after the barracks finishes. We want to build a Reaper from that barracks. And we want to build an orbital with our first 150 resources after the Reaper is built. Now from here, we want to prioritize building a refinery, a second supply depot to wall off, and then from here we'll be building a reactor on our barracks. Now I do route my first Reaper inside the base as I want to make sure I take care of this SCV to make sure they don't get any further scouting. So after I kill this first Reaper, or kill the first SCV, I route this Reaper to the enemy base. Now from this point, I want to make sure I'm using my mules as soon as possible, maintaining SCV production, and I route 3 additional SCVs to the refinery to fully saturate that base. Now with my first 100 Vespian, after building a reactor, I want to build a factory, and I'm going to be eventually morphing into a 111 with a standard marine tank medevac build. And down here on our natural base is finished. We want to build a orbital command center as soon as possible. Now with this Reaper, I'm able to get inside the base. I'm able to get a look and see that they are starting off with the 111, but their build is obviously very different. They choose to not go for an orbital, or a slow orbital, and they do not expand. So this is telling me there's going to be some early aggression. That's typically the bane of most fast expand builds, but with this particular build, I've found that I'm pretty much able to fend off most scenarios. There is the occasional, I'd say Zerg all-in, like with Lings for the most part, actually, very early Lings that you can't really defend against. When it catches you right as your Reaper leaves, or when your Reaper's in their base, or something along those lines. Now this first Reaper is very important because it allows us to scout this initial push. So I can see that he's starting to move out with his units. Meanwhile, back home, I'm building Marines 2 at a time from my reactor barracks. I'm building constant siege tanks, and I've just got my starport up, which I'll build with a reactor. All the while, I'm building additional supply depots to make sure I'm not supply blocked. I'm also trying to maintain constant SCV production as best as possible, but you do have some issues early on with the ability to build as much as you'd like due to the resources being so limited in the early game. Now from here, I do know that this push is coming. I've further scouted it with this Reaper here. You want to make sure you maintain a defensive posture. Sometimes you can catch their forces out, but clearly they got to my base before I could get out to them. The goal here is to continue to macro up, so you have more macro than them. You want to build constant production from your factories and barracks. Also, with them having an early Viking, it's good to get 2 Vikings with your first wave from your starport. This allows you to get air control, which shuts down their ability to push forward and do damage to your base. Now from here, they've got a pretty sizable army. Let's pause the game. They've got 22 supply versus my 28. I do feel fairly comfortable at this point. Just because my defensive posture, I've got an additional base, and this army is not that threatening. It's definitely threatening, but not the worst. So let's go into our lost units. So far we're up 50, but let's see how this plays out here. So they push forward, they start sieging on my tanks, they take one of my tanks down, take one of my Marines down, and they're putting pressure on my natural base. At this point, with this positioning, I know that I'm not going to be able to save this base. So I pull my SCVs back to the main, I lift my third, I have this defensive posture here, I'm able to take out some of their units, I'm macroing up all along, I take out their air forces, and this is what really changes things. So they no longer have air superiority, I'm able to push forward with this massive units and clean up the rest of their Marines. So I'm not able to catch these. This is a big mistake. I should have pushed after those. But at this point, I know that I have a supply lead, I know I have a resources lead, and I have a third base that's already up and collecting orbital resources, or these energy, I should say. So I'm pushing out and going to poke in and try to deny their natural, or just do some damage to them. All the while back home, I'm putting a third base down. Since I deflected this initial push, I know they'll be on their heels, so my initial thought is to make sure I'm building as much as possible. I'm maintaining siege tank production, I'm switching into medevac production, and I have a second barracks up, which I'll begin production out of as well. I'm very limited here on resources at this point in time, though. Now, as we get things up and running back at the main, I want to come poke into their natural. There's probably an opportunity right now to push in and do some damage, but I was very concerned in losing these forces here. So what I choose to do is just maintain a defensive posture and hopefully delay any push-outs and kind of contain the opponent as I macro up with this third base. So I know they're looking to get on their second, and I'm hoping to get on my third. Now back home, we have a second refinery going down, third base about to finish. I'm starting my tech lab production of Stimpack. I've got constant production of Marines, siege tanks, and medevacs. I'm working on my third orbital, and I'm looking to put down some engineering base to get some upgrades going, all the while expanding to an additional third racks and maintaining constant supply depot production to limit my supply cap. Now back here, I've got this defensive posture. I know they've got some heavy siege units, so they're not going to be pushing out with these, but I certainly don't want to push into them. Now, they start creating these missile turrets, so I know at this point that it's going to be a pretty heavy contain by them, or I should say fortification. But so back home, I'm moving out with my third. I'm looking to set that up. And I also have a second unit of forces that I'm looking to kind of scout around and make sure there's no funny business, there's no hidden third or something along those lines. All the while I'm maintaining production, building supply depots, and I do let it slip right here. As you can see, I have 500 resources, not the best job by me, but I'm microing around my army a bit. I do decide to pull back after realizing how fortified this spot has become. Now back at home, I begin production. I start using these resources, getting upgrades. I've got tank production, I've got marine production, marauder production, and medevac production. I've got my natural pretty much satisfied, or I should say saturated. I've got about 8 or half production of my third, and I've got a massive amount of mules that I'm able to drop right now. So half on that, and 1 on that. Now back here I have this secondary force and main force that I am just looking to make sure that I contain my opponent, all the while macroing up back at home. So one mistake I make is I press Control A and move my forces in to kill these siege tanks. Now I do make a massive mistake in just letting my units die, but I am able to take out both of their tanks before my tank gets taken out. So just sloppy play by me. What this does show me though is they're going mass Viking, which is good for me. It's a lot of wasted resources, and I'm not trying to maintain air superiority at this moment, so my marine tank comp will hard counter that comp. Now I've got a bunch of mules dropped here, a lot of income coming in at this point. So around 3,000 or hovering around 3,000. I'm dropping additional Raxes and I have constant production. Now I'm also looking to get into a fourth here, just because I'm looking to shut down this third. So with those tanks being positioned here, in my head I think that they're looking to drop a third right away, which they end up doing. But I've already macroed up a decent sized force back home. I'm almost doubling their supply. So I'm looking to go out and shut down this third. Back at home, I'm continuing my upgrades. I've got a combat shield finishing, 2 additional racks, some upgrades going here, and the fourth as I mentioned beforehand. So, and I've still got a sizable force back at home as well. So here I see the thirds down. I see they've got 3 tanks and 2 liberators, so that's a tough force to push into. But what I do is I push in with both my secondary force and the main force. This way I hit them from both angles and it draws the fire of these siege tanks away from one mass of units. I'm able to very easily push in, thanks to my 1-1 upgrades, and clear out his natural base, or third base I should say, and I'm able to eventually clean up this third command center. Now I do want to point out one thing is I move these SCVs out to the map, out in the map, and what this does is allows me to see any incoming drops or pushes that would come from the sides. Now back here I see this is 2 siege tanks and a liberator. I'm not sure what he has up here at this point, so I don't want to get too aggressive and waste my lead. I do have a pretty sizable resource advantage, and I'm on 3 bases, looking to currently get to 4, and still macroing up and spending my resources back at home. I also have an extreme supply lead at this point. Now eventually I get enough resources here that I feel comfortable enough to push in. I push in with all my forces and I'm able to close out the game with just brute force, out